Hello, everyone. I am Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Welcome to another historian's interview on the channel. My guest today has a Bachelor's of Science in Archaeology, a author, and a history interpreter. She has her own YouTube channel where she presents mini historical documentaries, random historical information, recreates historical foods, fashion, crafts, and shares history-based vlogs from her other channels. Now, if this guest looks familiar, it should, or she should. She had me featured on her podcast just last week where we discussed the Battle of Cannae during the Second Punic Wars during the Roman Republic era. Joining us all the way from the UK is Kayleigh of, hope I pronounced this right, Book and Trowel. I'm never going to get it right.
Book and Trowel.
Book and Trowel. Thank you, Kayleigh. Well, let's give a round of applause to our guest, Kayleigh, for joining us today. Okay, so sorry about that little butcher in the beginning, but Kayleigh, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your channel.
You're absolutely welcome. Now, before we dive into the interview, is there anything more you can tell us about yourself, your background, how you started the channel, and just a little bit more about yourself?
I started the channel, so I started another YouTube channel, a personal account, when I was at university. And then after a while, I realized that I didn't feel comfortable doing like vlogs of my life. If anything, I liked history because that's what I was studying and I've always had an interest in it. And I was like, I want to create something that I'm going to share with people about my interest in history, talking about different topics. So I've been doing it for 6 years, but I haven't been consistent, unfortunately.
Okay.
So this year I said to myself at the end of last year, I'm going to be consistent in 2024. And so I've had a video that's gone, in my head, semi-viral. So I have a video called the Burton Stone, which is it's a plague stone. So basically this plague stone would have had vinegar in it. And what would have happened is plague victims would have put money into the vinegar. So then when they're buying stuff from other people, they wouldn't infect them. So you tend to find these borders in towns and things like that. And I did a video on that. It's somewhat really quick. I just went, this is a thing. And it's had like thousands of views. And it's like, wow. What did I do to get it so many views? It's had the most views on my Instagram, but it's had a lot of views across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It's my most viewed video at the moment.
Dang.
Yeah.
Well, still congratulations on that. And 6 years, you've been doing this a lot longer than me. I actually had to go back to your YouTube channel just to see how long has she been doing this. And I saw 2018. It's like, okay, she's been doing this a lot longer than me, which explains the number of videos, which still I watch a few more of them. Like, congratulations on the success that you've had on the channel. I mean, 177 videos. That is quite an achievement in 6 years. So that I just want to make note of that. That is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, like I said, if I'd been a bit more consistent, I'm sure the numbers would have grown because they've grown more recently since I've been consistent. So this is why I'm trying to be more consistent. But it takes a lot of time to actually do a video because you've got to research the topic, then you've got to make sure you've got the footage. And then I decide whether I actually want to be on camera or if I want it to be like a voiceover. So I've got loads of footage on dongles to create into future videos. But yeah, I've actually got a plan on my phone. I can show you my plan, what I have at the moment of videos that I hope to come out with. So nice. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if you can see it.
There we go. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So yeah, I've got like different videos that I plan to make. Like some of them are reels, some of them are actual videos and stuff. So yeah.
Wow, so you have been like very, very busy, and I can see in your videos that you love history and archaeology too, which is a nice balance between. So actually, let's start with the beginning of that. So what sort of drew you to the field of archaeology, and then combining it with history?
So, in all fairness, when I went to do my undergrad, I didn't actually fully understand what archaeology was as such, because the only exposure I'd had was Tomb Raider, Indiana
Right.
Jones, and Time Team, which is a British program over here where they do a dig within the space of like a week. So that was the only experience I had of archaeology. I think Time Team probably helped me to understand it a little bit more. And I was like, well, I'm interested in history, but I'm not very good with facts and numbers, which archaeology doesn't focus on that. It's more, when you talk about in archaeology, it's more of a, yeah, it's between this time and this time, something in between happens. Whereas in
Ooh, all right.
history, whereas in history, it's like 1066 was the Norman conquest and so on. So I'm not very good with dates. I'm good at periods, but not dates. So then doing my undergrad, I just ended up falling in love with it. And I'm more of a practical person, so I preferred like doing the actual digging side of it. And I'm going to sound very morbid. The reason why it's a science one rather than just a BA is because I like dead things. I just find it fascinating. So like my qualification, I did bioarchaeology and
Ooh,
obviously
all right.
archaeology. So the bioarch one, you just studied human, animal, and plant remains.
All
And
right.
then in my final year, I did osteoarchaeology, which is the study of human remains. And it was just fascinating to be able to look at these skeletons and see people. You can't see a face unless you learn how to do the facial reconstruction. But
Right.
one of my go-to sayings that I say is about a skeleton is, your skeleton is a patchwork of your ancestry.
Right. That is
Because
actually very, very true.
yeah, and that's what I love, because like when we were going through it, they were like, this indicator would indicate the black, this indicator indicates the Caucasian, da 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 da. And then when you were looking through, I mean, we were very dramatic about it. We're like, yeah, this guy, he has a Caucasian head and he has African arms and he's clearly went on holiday when we were mucking about. But just that alone showed how much your ancestry determines how your facial structures are and what ethnicity you're going to be and things like that. And I just find it fascinating.
Very nice. Very nice. And then I see that kind of transfers over into your videos again, because they're very detailed, they're very informative. So when did you actually make the decision to start this part of your journey? Like, how did it come about? Was it like discussions amongst friends? Was it something that you wanted to do initially, or was it initially a spur of the moment?
No, it was something I just wanted to do with friends. So I had a friend who was a historian, I guess, and I was the archaeologist. So that's where I got the name from, Book and Trowel. So Book is history,
Oh,
Trowel is archaeology. And the idea was I wanted to try and do a channel with her. And this is why it took so long before I started it, because I was like, I want to do a channel we can both research into history and just talk about it and just geek out. And that was just the
right.
main thing, was just to geek out about these historical topics, because we have these sort of conversations on the regular. And I was just like, these need to be out there where other people can geek out. And for the longest time, she just wasn't playing ball. So in the end, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it for myself. And originally, I was called A Little History. That was what I called myself
Ooh,
originally.
okay.
But that's a very common name,
Yes.
unfortunately. And so in the end, I was like, you know what? I had this name in my head, and it's like, she doesn't want to take part. She didn't contribute to it, so why not use the name I came up with? So that's been my brand ever since.
And it works very well. It's a very, very unique name, and I love the little brand logo that you have. It is very cool. And so when you made the idea, decided that I'm going to do this, what was the first ever video that you actually put out, and what was the initial goal in mind, the promise you were making at that point when people see this?
Well, what I want is I want to make history tangible and interesting, because I feel when we learn it in school, it's just dry facts and numbers and events and stuff.
Yes.
And a lot of people come out of school going, I didn't like history. And I'm just like, but museums and cool things and events. So that's my way of trying to do it. Is right. I'm trying to sell it in these informative, but also hopefully entertaining ways. And I think the first video on my channel is a book video, because I thought I'd try and do like a little side thing. It's called Pages Through the Ages,
Right.
which is like a book series where I'll talk about a historical book, whether it be a factual book or a fictitious book, and as long as it's historical in some way. And so I think the first video I did was heresy. I think I did a video on heresy initially, which is a Tudor story. It's set in the
Okay.
Elizabethan. So it's set in Elizabethan England, and you're following this guy called Giovanni Bruno, who was an actual person, and it's a murder mystery series.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a really good book. I would recommend. So I think that was one of the first ones I mentioned. It was either that or it was Goodnight, Mr. Tom. And because I remember doing a video about Goodnight, Mr. Tom, which is also a book. That's the Second World War book. Mm-hmm. So in that one, you follow William Beach, who is an evacuee, and he ends up being dumped on Mr. Thomas Oakley. And now Tom's the sort of person who's like, oh, I don't have to deal with a kid, but this kid needs a home, so I'll deal with it. And they effectively define each other. They realize that even though they were forced upon each other because of the war and everything,
right,
they needed each other, because by Thomas being in William's life, he helps William to grow as himself and to be his own person, and to actually, to realize he is worth love and care, right, because he wasn't getting that at home. And what William does for Tom is says, you have something to love. It's a really lovely story. It's dark. It's a dark story, but it's a really lovely story. And I did that dressed up in 1940s clothes.
Nice. That's actually pretty cool. And that is very, very unique, talking about like the history of like the stories of the time, because they do provide a window into the past as well as the author themselves, which is very, very fascinating. I don't think I've had a lot of experience like reading like books of like let's say Elizabethan era or like even World War II or stuff like that. I think the only book, honestly, I get back, the only book that I have that I got is, I can't really see it, but it's an old book from like, I want to say the 1760s, and it's about the history of England from 1066 up to the Georgian era, and it's so fascinating. And honestly, I kept watching more reviews, and I was like, man, these are really, really good. I mean, the diverse topics are just incredible. And that kind of leads into my next question is, so you've already said that your promise to your audience is that you want to make history tangible, which I think is very, very important, because yes, it is true. In school, we're all taught history is just dates, facts, and they're literally cramming it down our throats. And sometimes that can turn off people from history. What would you say is sort of like the need or desire you want to satisfy in your audience, which to some may be different from the promise? So how would your content, say, be different from like the standard history podcasts and stuff like that?
At the moment, I don't think it is any different. I think it's not as polished as some channels are, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to. I'm just trying to bring my passion to get my passion out there, and hopefully try and get conversations started. And if I mess up and stuff, I want people to tell me, because I'm more than happy to change that. Because that actually happened recently. I did a video months ago. It was a quick little reel, and I had this guy basically say, all your information's utter crap, it's wrong, completely wrong, they didn't do da 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 da. And I went back through it and I went, yeah, shit, I did mess up there. So I've removed it since. I thanked him for flagging that. So I'm wanting to constantly learn as well, but I'm wanting to make it interesting for people. And I think it's become a lot easier with these bite-sized videos.
Right.
And the thing that I want to do is just make people aware that literally history is everywhere, literally
Definitely.
everywhere. So like I've got a video that I'm gonna have to edit. I've recorded one, but it's basically about, well, I've done one version of it. So in the UK, you'll probably find it everywhere in the UK. You probably won't even notice it. You'll find a wall and you might see stumps in that wall, metal stumps. The reason why those metal, yeah, I'll tell you why. So the reason why those metal stumps are there is because during the Second World War, there was the Scrap for Victory campaign where we had to try and give as much metal as possible to the cause. And so where those stumps are now in the walls, that's where a railing used to be.
Ah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's just stuff like that. It's just like, I want people to be observant of the things that are around them. It's like, I'm going to London tomorrow, and a friend of mine and me, we're going to go hunting for these bollards, because there's some bollards in London that aren't actually bollards. The cannons, there were cannons that were used in the Battle of Trafalgar, and they've been reused as bollards.
Dang, that's really, really, really incredible. And I love, I keep going back to like the blending of archaeology and history. And sort of like a question to you is like, how do you balance that in terms of like your content? Like, how do you find like the balance between like talking about history, but also talking about archaeology, which in itself is history? I know a lot of people would generally think, well, archaeology is archaeology and history is history. That's not necessarily true. They are the
One and the
same.
same.
Yes, they are in different fields and they have different disciplines, but they're ultimately talking about history. So, how do you sort of like balance that and show that archaeology is history?
I mostly talk about objects, and I focus on the shiny objects, because I personally, I don't care about the shiny objects, but I know people do, because we are
Yeah.
magpies. Because if I have shown like the odd video of the things that I like, so I've got one reel on my socials, and it's of the Coppergate sock. And the Coppergate sock is a Viking nail binded sock. So nail binding is a one needle knitting, and it's a knitted sock that still survives. It was found at Coppergate in York, and it's wool, it's textile, and it survives. And that's what I try and do. I try to show how cool archaeology is, because it is one and the same. Like, history is all about the winners. History is about the stuff that's written down.
Right.
Archaeology is about us, about what
Yes.
we've left behind. Because you can read a book and you can learn about Henry VIII and his wives or whatever, but you never learn about us. The
Nope.
archaeology is what we've left behind. It tells our story. And that's why I like to talk about them both.
And that's very, very true. And I like how you point that out that, yeah, history is written by the victors, the winners, but archaeology is about us. It's the winners and also the losers, because both sides died on a battlefield or they lived in a time and they just kind of get forgotten. It's not just about, oh, it's just some old bones. Well, okay, well, why were they buried here? What's the significance of their placement here? Why is there, let's say, a majority more men than women here? Why is that? And it's that stuff which is important, because it does open a window. Because me myself being a historian, I will say the books can only get us so far. That's why you need other sources, and that sometimes includes archaeology. Archaeology helps fills in the gaps where the sources kind of leave us hanging dry. Like if a source tells us, oh, this person died here and he had these features, well, if you find a body that fits the descriptions, but it doesn't match all the classifications, that opens up a new door. Like, A, this disproves the story that we've been told, and B, now we have a new story to tell, which is fascinating, because at the end, that is what history is trying to do. It's to educate, it's to entertain us, and also enlighten us.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I love about archaeology. If you do like battlefield archaeology, for example,
Right.
that tells you the full picture. Because if you read a document, it'll be like, oh yeah, this thing happened, this is how we did it, we won, we defeated blah blah blah. But by looking at what you've just said, yeah, looking at the stuff that's left behind, you go, actually from these shell cartridges that have been left behind, they were actually using these, or from these skeletal remains that have been left behind, it tells us that this was more brutal than what they portrayed it as, or things like that. So yeah, that's what I love. It's just a blending of the two. And also, archaeology can't lie. History can lie. Archaeology can't.
Oh yes, that is a very true thing. Written sources can be altered, they can be reinterpreted, which is true. Archaeology, unless you actually dig up the bones, destroy it, make a plaster casting, and put it back without no one noticing, but that goes to extreme lengths. But yeah, to your point, you are right. Archaeology doesn't lie. History, it can be fabricated in the sources, which is 100% true. So with all of this research that you've done for your channel, all the videos that you've had in the beginning, starting, what was the initial feedback like? Did you get any like positive comments, critiques? What was that part like for you?
In regards to my content,
Yes. In regards to content, did you have any like comments that popped up on your YouTube, on your Instagram?
I've had some. I get more people liking and sharing. I notice more about sharing and likes on like my Instagram more than anything. I've had the odd comment, but nothing major. It's just people going, "Yeah, cool, thanks." It's like, yay. But sometimes I have these really interesting conversations with people. So I did a video again a little while ago, last year actually, and it was about a tuberculosis dress.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so we're going into social history now. This dress was made to make the wearer look like they had tuberculosis. So the way it's built with regards to like the bodice, it would make the person like hunch over, and then you would like change your complexion and stuff. And this was made in about the 1800s when tuberculosis
Okay.
genuinely was killing millions of people. And it just goes to show that romanticizing disease is not a new idea, for starters.
Okay.
But I just find it a very fascinating dress, and just knowing that this was a thing. It wouldn't have been everybody. It would only been like a handful of people that have been doing this.
Right.
But the fact that it actually exists is fascinating, because we still romanticize that disease. Just think of films like Moulin Rouge and stuff. She's like, oh, like Nicole McKinnon's character. She's what, meant to be in her early 20s or something. She's died from tuberculosis, and it's seen as this really romantic disease, and it's not. It killed people. But the
Yes.
conversation that I was having in the chat was, somebody told me that a loved one had tuberculosis, and thankfully for them, they were cured of it, because they were affected around about the time of the 1950s and 60s, when they had these tuberculosis hospitals and they'd make you like sleep outside because they thought it would help you. And thankfully they managed to survive that and live for a long time. But because I just talked about a piece of fashion, a very dark piece of fashion, suddenly it's opened up a conversation. And it's that I like having that interaction with people, and people go, oh yeah, I had that experience, or that sounds really cool, or yeah, that's the sort of things I love getting. And I don't get them as often as I'd like, but the times when I do get them, it's really good.
Nice. And then kind of leading into that, to the next question, do you feel that those interactions sort of validate like the amount of work that you put in to your content, to your videos? Because you and I both know making these videos, it's a long and lonely experience trying to get these out. We put a lot of work into these, and we kind of don't know if people will like them, will share them, will talk about them. So with those interactions that you have with people, does it sort of validate um, who you are, in a sense of like, I know what I'm doing. Like, this is something that I genuinely want to do.
Yeah, it is. It makes me feel better when I do that, even if the video itself doesn't, because that's the one thing that I get a bit discouraged about, I must admit. When I really love something and it's only had like a couple of views, I'm just like, oh, it's cool, please like it. But yeah, when people interact with you and that sort of thing, or go, oh, this was really informative, thank you, I've learned something, I love it, because I feel like I'm doing something right then. Because I just want to make it interesting. I do it in my job as well. I engage with the public all the time in my job. Because I work in a museum and I talk to people about history all the time. And it's nice, especially when they come up to me and leave and go, oh, you've made my day really good. That was really informative. It just makes me feel like I'm actually doing something right. So
that is like really, really beautiful, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Now, kind of going back to you again, Kayleigh, who would you say have been like your role models in the study of archaeology and history, as well as the presentation of both fields? Who really molded you into the person that you are now, academically speaking?
Lara Croft.
Really?
To some extent, yeah. So I don't have any actual people in my life that inspire me, aside from everybody that I work with, because we all manage to bounce off each other and it's fantastic. But I'd say role models wise in regards to history, probably they're all fictitious characters. So one of them's Evie from The Mummy. I really liked her character.
Ooh, all
I know
right.
she was a librarian, but also she knows a lot about Egyptology, and it's because of her that I really want to go to Egypt. Still haven't. But yeah, it was her. Probably a little bit of Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, in all fairness, because again, even though she was a Tomb Raider, she still knew her stuff.
Right.
And in regards to like historians that I really like, there's just certain people that I like to watch on TV. So like, there's a woman called Lucy Worsley. Her stuff is really good. Even though she does over dramatize stuff, like she likes to dress up in all of things. But there was
Right.
another guy called Neil Oliver, and he did a lot of good
Ooh,
stuff
okay.
with archaeology. So I would say those are the ones I kind of lean towards. And then in regards to my video style, I'd say probably now, thanks to short form media, I get a bit more inspiration from what's she called? Alice Loxley, I think she's called. Her content's called History of Alice or something. She's become really big recently
Right.
on social media. You probably have seen her floating around. But yeah, that I'm getting lots of inspiration from her in regards to short form media. But yeah.
I will have to say this, Kayleigh, you're probably the first guest I've had on my show that have actually included fictional characters as role models, which is incredible. That is the first time. So, Tomb Raider and Evie. I don't think I've ever heard anyone mention Evie from The Mummy. That is a huge drop. But yeah, she was a very, very fascinating character who was a librarian, but also loved history of Egypt and all the other fields, which honestly, that is just cool. You know, to be also pretty honest, maybe what we don't know is I actually initially tried out to go into the field of archaeology before I went to history. I actually want to prove a theory about this story, supposedly about Greeks or Romans in China in this one village. And there were some monuments that were created, some of them were destroyed, some of the people had Caucasian features, but no one could definitively prove that they were of Greek or Latin descent. I was so captivated by that story that I wanted to do that as my dissertation. Unfortunately, I didn't get into the archaeological program, but I did get into the history program. Even though I didn't get to work on that, that story has always been fascinated me about stories of the past and stories that we don't know, which I'm sure you probably agree, Kayleigh, about the people you've had on your show that have really talked about topics that even I didn't know of. So, kind of leading on into that for a little bit, what recent episode or past episode did you have with a guest about a piece of history that you did not know about, but you felt was important to discuss?
Um, Pretty much all of them, really. Like the vast majority of I'm assuming you mean my podcast episodes.
Yes.
Yeah. With my podcast episodes, on the vast majority of pretty much all of them, there was stuff that I might know snippets of things, but I don't know like the full ins and outs. So like, my friend Gareth did one on Georgian and Victorian crime and punishment.
Ooh, okay.
And he went in depth about the prison system, what the prison system was like, what it was like for certain crimes that you could commit, who were the sort of people that petitioned to improve prison life and things like that. And yeah, so that was fascinating. But all the episodes have been interesting. Your episode was really interesting because it's not anything I know absolutely anything of. I know that the
Oh,
Romans
thank you.
existed. That's the most I know. uh, so yeah, I just, this is why I love doing my podcast episodes, because I love to learn from other people. I think the only one where I was a bit more like, yeah, I know this, was my Viking one that I did with my friend Alex, which,
Right.
oh my God, that he knows so much about Vikings. I mean, the episode I did with him, it just literally just scraped the surface. He is so knowledgeable. But a lot of the stuff he was saying in that particular episode is stuff that I learned at uni. The other episode where I had a fair bit of information already was the archaeology one, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, just all of them. It's just, I love all of them. They're just so fascinating. And I just genuinely love learning from other people. And it's even better when it's something they genuinely geek out about, that they're passionate
Right.
about, because you can just see it in their faces, because they're just like, I'm going to tell you about this thing because it's cool. And I like that.
I completely agree. There's nothing really more fascinating and more enjoyable than talking with people in history, even if it's like a different avenue of history that you yourself don't study, but you find fascinating. It is incredible. Like, you know, my channel, I even had a guest speak about the Confederate Navy and what happened to them after the Civil War. I knew nothing of that. And that was so fascinating, which ultimately it's why I love history, and it's why I love doing these episodes, because just like you, I love learning about new things. I love interacting with people who enjoy history, because I learn so much. I learn from them as well. And ultimately, you know, we all branch different avenues: archaeology, history magazines, articles, books, etc. And speaking of books, you're also, if I'm not mistaken, from our last talk on your channel, you are also working on a book, correct?
Yes. Um, I've been working on a book for about 2 years. So there is a topic that I can talk about till the cows come home. It's just mostly because I've been exposed to it since I was about 7 years old,
All right.
and that is the Bronte family. So the Brontes are a literary family, and the three daughters ended up being, they're very famous. They've written iconic stories. So that the ones that are the most popular are The Tenant of Wildfield Hall, which was written
Mm-hmm.
by Anne Bronte, who was the baby. Wuthering Heights, which was written by Emily Bronte. Now that book is fascinating because it doesn't fit into any category. Like, it fits into the classic category now, but at the
Right.
time when it's written, it doesn't fit into a category because it's got supernatural stuff in it. It's got a romance in it. It's got social class stuff in it.
Ooh.
So it's a mix. It's a mixed bag. And then the other one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And so those are all three very famous stories, and they've been made into many adaptations, plays, all sorts. And what I'm writing about is, because one of the things that I feel a lot of people don't know about is the fact that these sisters actually had two older sisters. So in the family themselves, they had 6 children in total. So you had Mariah, who was born in 1814. You
Mm-hmm.
had Elizabeth, who was born in 1815. You have Charlotte, who was born in 1816. Bramwell Bronte, who was the only boy, he was born in 14, 15, 16, 17, 1817. Emily was born in 1818, and then Anne was born in 1820. Um, yeah, and I'm currently writing a book about the 2 older sisters, because they both died in childhood, and I feel their story gets just pushed aside because, one, barely anything survives from them because they were only children. But my
Right.
point is, they survived. They were there. They existed. So I'm wanting to write that. I'm writing their story.
Very, very fascinating, because I never heard about this family until speaking with you on your channel. And I knew some of the stories. Wasn't really, I remember reading them in high school for my English class. And I, I'm just going to be the first one to admit, stories of that era, I can never get involved, just because the written language, even if like they try to
Mm.
update it, I couldn't get involved. But there is history tied to those stories, which I think is important. So Kayleigh, why do you think the story about this family is important? Because what does the family represent in the larger scope of history?
Well, what they represent is they were living at a time of change. So if you look at each family member individually, they were living in a time when the slave trade was starting to be abolished. They've
Mm-hmm.
got the strange overlap. So their childhood is actually a Georgian childhood, but their adulthood is a Victorian adulthood. So they've
Mm.
got that overlap. It's the good thing about learning about it is because they didn't fit into the normal. Well, there's no normal, but they didn't fit in society basically. So
Right.
they were kind of like a middling class family because they went and had an education, but they weren't wealthy enough to wait around for the guy to come and sweep them off their feet. But they also weren't as poor as the people in the village that they lived. So they were constantly in this weird like limbo.
Hmm.
Um, and the only thing that was available, at least for the girls, was to become teachers and governesses, which being a governess was only a thing roughly about like probably early 1800s to the back end of it. Because prior to that, if you were an educated woman, a governess wasn't actually a role. It became a role later on that a lot of educated women started doing because it mostly happened, I think, after the Napoleonic Wars, where a
Right.
lot of women were needing to have money, but they were too
Mm-hmm.
educated and stuff. So they ended up making this new like job where you go and work for a family and teach their kids basically. So to learn about this family, it talks about it's basically showing you about social standings. It's talking about education and how important it was because Patrick Bronte, the father, he really
Right.
encouraged all his family to have an education. Even his girls were had an education. He was adamant that it was very important because he was very driven on the idea of an education. Because when he was back in Ireland, that's where he comes from. He
Mm-hmm.
actually he went to school, and then when his time had come up, he then went to become a teacher, and then he opened up his own school, sort of thing. So education's been a very important thing for this family, and I think that's one of the things we need to see the bigger picture of that period. Yes, they're only one family, but they're only talking about one little part of it. Because whenever we look at the Victorian era, it always goes to, oh, they were shoving kids up the chimneys and stuff, and it's like they were, but this
Yes.
is a family that wasn't happening to. They were being sent to girls' schools to have an education to hopefully go on to do better things, be able to fend for themselves in a way.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of things around it that you can learn from. You can cherry pick loads of different things.
So it almost seems like that, as you will probably agree, that this is a family that literally, as you said, the childhood was in the Georgian era in UK history, and then their adulthood in the Victorian era, which I honestly think when people talk about the Victorian era, we always, at least for people like me in the States, we generally think of the Victorian era like in the late 1860s at the dawn of the 20th century. But before that, I mean, we know like very little, or at least choose not to really study. So would you say that this book also will kind of like debunk like some like stereotypes or like myths surrounding the English transition period from the Georgian to the early Victorian era and like educate people who may not be as knowledgeable on either of those histories?
I don't think I'm going to be able to debunk anything. Unfortunately, I don't have enough information to do much. But what I'm
Okay.
hoping to do is because my book's talking about the two older ones that died in childhood, so it's mostly focusing on a Georgian childhood, and that's what it's going to be. Hopefully,
Oh, okay.
bringing to light. Because when we think of kids and going to school, you either think upper class kids who are being taught at home,
Right.
or you think of Victorians and suddenly it's the rag schools, it's the Sunday schools, it's the school's open for everybody. We kind of miss out this middling bit of what
Right.
happened to people and how did they get an education. So it's mostly going to be talking about a Georgian childhood and what it was like for them in a changing world of things. Because unfortunately, the children that I'm focused on never met Queen Victoria. That she wasn't a queen by this point,
Right.
obviously. But what it is doing, it shows you. I'm hopefully going to try and show like the influences of what was happening in life at that time. So like when Princess Charlotte died, for example, yes, for the adults, they had to go into mourning, but it's like, did that affect the kids? That's what I'm
Right.
looking into. I'm looking into what was life like for a child of the Georgian era. Because again, when you're Georgian, you go Regency, you think balls, you think
Right.
Pride and Prejudice and stuff. And I'm thinking more of a, well, what about the kids? What did they do? Especially if you're like in a middling-ish style
Right.
family. Yeah.
Fascinating.
I think that's
This
what
is
I'm
great.
going to do.
This is really, really cool. Like, I know very little of like the Georgian history, and hopefully when this book does come out, because I'm going to buy it and want to review it,
Oh no.
I want to learn a lot. So let's see. You work at a museum where you educate the population. You work on your podcast and your YouTube channel, which I must say I love it. And you're also writing a book. So this is a very loaded question. With all these very, very important things in your life, how do you balance it out? Like, what motivates you to continue doing your passion? Because I'm sure you may agree that there have probably been some like dark days where you probably did not want to make a video or make a reel for Instagram. What still motivates you to make your content on YouTube and Instagram? What is your why?
um, I don't have a very good balance for start. What's my why? I guess my why is, if I'm interested, I'm sure other people will be. I think this thing's cool, so might as well share this cool thing with other people. I suppose that's my why. I just, I, there's things I want to become, and so that's the thing that kind of drives me to do the stuff I'm doing, because I hope to grow, and I want to be that person that ends up being on the TV. Whether that happens, I don't know, but I want to be that person at some point in the future who ends up on the telly talking about the things, going, so I'm currently outside such and such a place that dates back to such and such a time. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's my why, because I want to be able to just show people how cool history actually is. So I think that's what drives me. But yeah, in regards to the balance, I don't have a very good balance. Like, all my outings are like history related. So it's lucky that I have
um,
history friends, so it's fine.
I understand. The balancing is a struggle. I even have to write like a calendar just so I don't forget, like, okay, this episode's on this day, this episode's on this day. I completely understand. And then making your content, this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask, Kayleigh. Have you ever gotten a sense of validation from other historian content creators or like local history enthusiasts that have seen your work and have said, I like what you're doing. I think you found like you're calling like you belong here. Because I asked that question because we go into a field, we work hard, and it's one thing to be a part of a field of study, archaeology, history, or anything. It's one thing to put out something that we enjoy and get feedback from like people who may not have learned about this. It's another thing entirely when your peers see it and then they tell you this is where you belong. Have you ever had that interaction with fellow historians, fellow history enthusiasts, or even archaeology buffs and enthusiasts?
No, no. The most I've got is my colleagues basically bigging me up, saying your stuff's really good. I watch every single thing. um, that's probably the most I get. I haven't really gotten any interaction from any other known historians. Maybe with the exception of um, the two people that I kind of talked to on Instagram. Um, so like, there's a guy that I talk to on Instagram, and he comments occasionally on my content, and he says, "Oh, I really appreciate that. It's really fascinating." And that's about it, really. I've not had any big people really probably notice me. I think I'm quite a small fry at the moment, so give it time.
Well, let me be the first to say, as a fellow historian, I've watched your content. I love your videos. Let me be the first to say this. Kayleigh, welcome to the family. Welcome to the circle because you definitely belong in this community because, you know, historians, I've always said this, we want to help everyone. We want to help our fellow historians because it is a small circle. It is a small family. because we do all these different things. Some of us work in the government as like state historians. Some of us work for nonprofit organizations. Some of us make magazine articles or work for publishing houses. We're all these different things, but we all collectively come together and help out. And Kayleigh, as I said again, as being like the first historian here, let me just say this: you belong in this community. Welcome to the historian family.
Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. And we're just nearing the end of the interview. So now we come on to probably like one of the most important questions of the segment, which I always ask my guests is, Kayleigh, looking back on everything that you've done so far in your life up to this point, what is your word of wisdom to other history buffs, archaeologists, and fellow history enthusiasts that want to do content creation or want to do something similar? What is your word of wisdom to them?
I'll break it into categories. If you feel you do not have the grades to go to university, but yet you want to do history or archaeology, fucking do it. You can do it. I came out with D's, E's, and F's. I went to university and I came out with 2-2, which is equivalent to a C. When you see report cards of me from school with regards to history, my teacher said I wasn't good at history, and yet I now have a degree in archaeology. So don't let anybody say you can't do it. And when it comes to content creation, just do it. If you are interested and you've found something that you're geeking out about, share that, because believe me, you'll find other people who will geek out with you. So yeah, just do it. Have faith in yourself and work hard as well. Just keep going. Like, as long as you know what you want to do and you do everything you can to get to that point, just keep going. You'll get there. I'm always
Awesome.
learning.
Awesome. Very, very strong words of wisdom. I love it. And now, listeners, we've reached the end of this wonderful interview. I want to extend our thanks to Kayleigh for coming onto the show and telling us about her podcast, her journey in her fields, and showing us a window into her life. Kayleigh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry it's been a bit of a muck about. It's been a bit of a stressful day, but I made it. I'm here.
No worries, no worries. Now, before we officially end the episode, listeners, I'm going to turn over to Kayleigh to promote her work. Do you have any episodes that we should be looking out for? Anything in particular? Will you be doing any events at your museum? Now is the time to advertise for yourself.
Okay. Well, you can find me on pretty much all socials known as Book and Trowel. The symbol is a book with a trowel over the top of it. I know, very imaginative. But I have a blog post, I have a Instagram, a TikTok, and a YouTube channel that does all those things, does videos. I have a podcast which is called What's Your History. It's on Spotify, it's on YouTube, but Audible's probably the best place to find it. I have fantastic people on there telling me wonderful things. In regards to future projects, my book, hopefully once I've completed it and sent it off, it will be called The Forgotten Bronte Sisters. So keep an eye out for that at some point. I'm hoping to get it published this year, but who knows. I'm hopefully going to be having some articles published this year as well. So keep an eye out for those. I will be posting them on my socials. What else? Where am I? I'm doing all the things basically. In regards to content, I'm going to be having a video coming out probably this week. Have I got it for this week about St. Mary's Abbey? Actually, this weekend I am going to be recording a video. Should be coming out this weekend for the 24th, because this year marks 80 years since the Great Escape. So I am doing a video about that. And yeah, so I'm going to be doing a video about that. There's going to be some themed videos coming out. So I'm going to be doing one about Richard Turpin, who was a notorious highwayman. That video will be coming out on the day, his death day, basically.
Right.
I've got loads of stuff coming out. Just keep an eye out on all the socials. You'll see it popping up. Yeah, that's probably it, really. That's all the things in regards to exciting things that happen in my life. I'm going to London tomorrow.
Nice, nice. Well, listeners, I will linking all that down below. All the socials, the blogs, everything. Also going to pin mark the episode with me on Kayleigh's channel where we talked about the Battle of Kenai. So make sure to check out that video as well as her other ones. And yeah, let's help blow up Kayleigh's channel. Let's spread the word. Let's like, let's subscribe. Let's do everything to spread the word. And with that, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this wonderful interview. Again, I want to thank our guest, Kayleigh, for joining us today. Kayleigh, thank you so much for joining us today on the channel.
Thank you for having me, Gabriel. And yeah, check out his episode. It's fascinating. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. And as always, listeners, be on the lookout for future episodes. And as always, I'm doing a Q&A special to mark the 1-year anniversary of my book, The Gathering. Comment down below or comment on my most recent post on LinkedIn, where you can find me there also to pose your questions and everything about the book. And be on the lookout for my last episode of the month with another indie author. Until then, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill, signing out.